Hey guys, this is Carrie, and in this video we're going to be trying to recreate a game that one of my students found randomly on Replit when they were bored and thought this would be a fun project for us to make. So we're going to refresh the screen, and the way the game works is there's a bomb and we have to defuse it. So we take guesses and we can see that it gives us some feedback. So my number 8, which turned green here, was correct. And we've got a ticking countdown here to keep track of time. So what I did was, because I don't want the bomb to explode, I'm going to close down this window and I'm going to open up a screenshot that I took so that we can recreate the user interface. All right, so here we go. We've got our Replit open. This definitely looks like an HTML, CSS, JavaScript app to me because it lives on the internet and it has these great graphics. So let's make an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript project. And we can call it Defuse the Bomb. And we'll create our Replit. So for me, it looks like there's a couple of things going on here. So thinking about the HTML first, we're going to have a div, I guess, that surrounds the whole app. So we'll do a div and then dot content. And the same way that dot means class in both JavaScript and CSS, if we press tab now, it will automatically create a div. And I'm going to open this in this full screen. And then I'm also going to move this over so that I have enough space to code, because right now I definitely don't. So now we've got a div with a class of content that's going to house our whole app. The first thing we'll have is an h1 that says defuse the bomb. I always like to put an h2, an app by Carrie, or a web app by Carrie, or whatever you want to call it, a project by Carrie, or not by Carrie, but by your name, right? Then next up, we're going to have the time. So maybe that could be a paragraph or an h3. I'm thinking just to make it, I guess let's make it an h3. So we've got our h3 here, and this is going to have the time left. So I'll put 0, 0, dot, dot, 60, because I think that that's the starting time that was here instead of the O2. Then we're going to have the passcode right here. And when I see this layout, it looks like we have these objects grouped together. So I'm going to actually create another div inside of this div. And that's not something we've done too much with. And this div will have a class of passcode. And inside of this div, I'm seeing 4 places with text. So these could be a variety of element types. Let me just make these paragraphs. And I'm going to give these each a class of number. So p dot number, paragraph with a class of number, times 4. So asterisk 4. And this should create 4 paragraphs with a class of number. 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. And those should all start by saying 0 inside of them. Cool. Now next up, we have, in addition to this passcode group, and I'm going to space things out more. So this is like the top group of 3 things, which will bring us down to here. Then we've got this passcode div, which is these. Then next up, we've got this div here with the keypad. Or sorry, I guess it's not obviously a div. For me, this is obviously a div that is a group of things grouped together. So we'll add another div. And this one will be of class keypad. And then inside of the keypad, we'll have 10 paragraphs. And these will each be a little bit different. Or actually, we can make these buttons. Let's see. Let's make these buttons, since they're buttons, right? So let's do buttons with a class of, instead of number, I already used number for these, we could call it key. And we want to make 10 of these. So we'll do button class key, and then we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. All right, so I think this is all of the HTML that appears on this page. If we load up our page, it's going to look pretty bad. All right, so there's our HTML. Actually, it doesn't look too bad. But we can make this look a lot better using some styling. So we'll go over to JavaScript. And I'm just going to write down, so content, passcode, and keypad. So I know I'm going to be styling the content. This is not JavaScript. This is style, CSS. So I know we're going to be styling the content. I know we're going to be styling the passcode. And I know we're going to be styling the keypad. Let me just see if I got all those classes correct. It feels like I didn't, but. Okay, content, passcode, keypad, and these all have dots because these things are all being styled by selecting their classes. Also, I always find it easier to have this tool for styling always set to a certain thing. So I'm going to select every element on the page and do box sizing border box. And what this has to do with is let's say that you added a border around something. The border could be within the width that you define for the object or outside of the width that you define for the object. This will put the border inside, and I find that that's an easier tool to work with. It seems subtle, but it makes a difference, and it makes it easier for me to create the style that I like. All right, so nothing's changed. All right, so for content, this is the usual div that contains the whole app. So I'm going to give it a fixed width of something like 600 pixels. By giving it a fixed width, we'll be able to put it in the center by doing a margin auto. Let's make the background of this div whatever color you like for the whole app. I guess I'm going to stick with ugly colors for the start and then finesse the colors. So now we've got a green one here. We'll throw a text align center on this. So that should center everything. So it's already starting to look a little bit like the Defuse the Bomb web app that we saw here. Now we want to color in the background of the whole page. We could select the body and make the background. And I'm just going to stick with ugly colors here, guys, and then fix the colors at the end. So I'll make the background yellow for the whole page. Awesome. I guess if the page looked, oh, and then the font here is super bad. So I'm just going to make it a standard font. Instead of using a Google font, there's a couple of basic fonts that come with every computer. And I'm going to move this, from the body just to every element. So select every element and make the font family sans serif, which is a basic font that has no decorations on it. So it looks super simple. All right, nice. This is starting to look better. Next up, we need to start to worry about our keypad, our passcode, as well as our keypad. So both of these are easiest to style using a tool that I use a lot. And if you may have asked me for help with a layout, I probably would have said something like, oh, let's make it a grid. And so this is a tool called CSS Grid. And for me, this is the best tool for doing the layouts. Whenever you think about laying things out side by side, and we haven't had to use this because we've gotten we've gotten lucky with things like our soundboard where the images naturally looked in the right spot. In order to make these numbers a grid like this, where they're the grid doesn't have to do with them being square. The grid has to do with them being a column, or the grid here would have to be 4 rows, 3 columns. Whenever you see things like that, I use display grid. And then if you type GTC, you're able to define your grid template columns. So I count 4 columns for the passcode. So let's do 4 columns. Actually, and I'm not going to use this repeat function, so you can delete that. We'll use 4 columns, and we'll make each of the columns something like 70 pixels. And so what it looks like without the repeat function is 70 pixels, 70 pixels, 70 pixels. We want 1, 2, 3, 4 columns for 1, 2, 3, 4 objects. Let's take a look how that looks. Okay, nice. I'm going to change this from grid to inline grid and see if that helps me with the centering. Okay, that helps with the centering. So this is the exact same thing. It's a grid, except inline grid allows it to be centered from the text align center property of the content. All right, so these are all centered. Now thinking about the keypad is actually going to be a grid as well. So let's just do display inline grid. Now how the keypad is different is it's going to have 3 columns and 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. So we'll do grid template columns, 3 columns, and to me it looks like they're roughly the same size as these ones are. So we could do 70 pixels or something like 60 pixels. I'm going to start it off with 70 pixels, and we only want 3 columns. So instead of doing 4 of them, like we had here, we'll do 1, 2, 3. Next up for the buttons, we also want to have a grid template rows, and we want 4 rows, because 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're making like a graph paper grid. So 70 pixels, 70 pixels, 70 pixels, 70 pixels, 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the reason why I made them the same dimensions is it looks to me like within the grid, these buttons have the same height and width. All right, nice. So we've got our passcode and we've got our number grid coming out. I'm going to add a break element in between these. So there's an element type called line break, which should create just like an enter button between this and this. All right, that looks better. So we're going to move the 0 key over at the ends, but I think we can continue styling even without doing that yet. So let's look at our buttons. I'm now going to start to like pop this out. Let's see. Not great, but I'm trying to look at all of the different things at the same time. There we go. So we want our buttons to have a larger font size. And I guess you could select it using type button, or you could select it using type, or using the class of key. So I'll just say button is going to have a border radius of 100% because we want circular buttons. It's going to have a background of black. This means that the text color, which we write with color, should be white. The font size should be a lot bigger than what it was before. The font size should be, I don't know, let's try 25 pixels. Let's do a refresh. Looking better. I notice that it has this funky border right now. So we'll correct that by adding border 4 pixels, solid gray. So that it looks maybe something like that. All right, that looks good. And you can decide how long you want to spend on getting it to look exactly like this. One thing that I noticed compared to the regular app is it's very hard for me to tell these are buttons that could be pressed. So what we'll do is we will add a button hover effect, which is whenever we hover over a button, we'll make the background dark gray. We'll also make the cursor into the pointer so that instead of being the little arrow, it's the little hand. And so now I think this is looking more closely like the regular app. One thing I noticed was that the regular app, when I hovered over the buttons, it didn't go directly like this. It had a smooth transition. So let's add a transition property to the regular button. And we'll say that every time we hover, it should take 0.5 seconds to change from this state to this state. So let's see how that looks. That's looking a little more gradual. I think that's actually too slow though, so maybe 0.25. So you can play around with that number until it looks how you like, but now I think these are much more apparently clickable things. And once we start to add in the JavaScript so that these things actually change when we click it, I think things should be pretty good. All right, let's go back up to these paragraphs right here, which are the number paragraphs, because these are looking pretty bad right now. So let me give these number things, let me start styling these number things. So we'll do dot number. I'm going to make a terrible looking background for these things. We'll give it a background of blue. I haven't used blue yet. So that's looking okay. There we go. I'm also seeing that there's a small gap in between these things as well as these things here. And I don't think I have that gap. So why don't I add something called grid gap? And if I type GG, it will come up grid gap of 5 pixels in between these things. So let's see how that looks on the keypad. It spaces the keypad out a little more. I think maybe shrinking the gap down of our grid, this will change the spacing in between the rows and columns. So we have a little bit of space there, will look better. For the numbers, we'll put a grid gap. No, sorry, it doesn't go on the numbers actually. That's a little bit deceptive. The grid gap goes on the passcode because that was the grid that will contain the numbers. So we'll add a grid gap here, and I think this grid gap is a little bigger, so maybe 5 pixels here. All right, that looks better. All right, these are already text aligned center, which is really nice to see. I'm also going to add a fixed height to our number things. So thinking about our passcode was 70 pixels wide for each column. So we'll add a height of 70 pixels as well. And now we've got that. I'm going to make the color of these white as well, so that the numbers here are easier to read. I'm also going to increase the font size. And I liked how 25 pixels looked before, so I'm going to stick with 25 pixels. So let's see how that looks. So I just keep going back and forth and refreshing. All right, these look like to me that they have a white border. So let's do border. And these are a thinner border, so something like 1 pixel solid white. Like that. And it has a slight border radius in the original app. So border radius, instead of being 100%, we could do something like 5 pixels, and that will smooth out those corners a little bit. So that looks more like that. Okay, I think this is looking pretty decent. One thing that you could think about is I want the numbers maybe to be in the center here. And I don't actually know a super easy way to do that, but I do know a way that uses the same structure of grid in order to put those in the center, or I think I know a way. So let me experiment here with that. So putting them vertically in the center used to be really hard with CSS, at least to my knowledge. But if we turn each of these into a grid of their own, so now what we're saying is this number box is actually a grid and it can be sectioned up. We're not actually going to section it up. We're just going to use a couple of the tools that come with the grid property. So we could do align items, center, and let's see if that works. Nope. Oh, it did. Awesome. Align item center, vertically center these. All right, so I think that actually looks better than the app that we got there. All right, so last steps maybe are to fix the colors and then also to worry about the 0 key being in the middle here. So let's fix the colors. So I think that instead of yellow, everything is black basically, and all of the words are white. So I'm going to say select everything on the page and make the color white, which will make the font white everywhere. I'm going to change the body background to black. I'm going to change the content background from green to black as well. So this should be black, this should be black, and the word should be white. Let's see how that looks. Defuse the bomb. It's starting to look pretty close to this thing. We can keep the keypad, we can keep this code blue, or you can change that to a different color. I kind of actually like blue there. And then with the hover effect, that looks nice. Yeah, I think this is good for me. All right, so let's see. Last thing is the 0 going there. So let's see. So we're going to go to the keypad. The keypad has 3 columns, 70 pixels, 70 pixels, 70 pixels, and 4 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I often will forget how to do this, but we're going to make a grid. It's not grid template columns. It's not grid auto columns. One of the nice things about CSS is if you start typing in something on Replit, it will come up with suggestions. I believe it's grid template areas. And so grid template areas will allow us to create a little mini version of this grid here, and then articulate where each of the buttons goes within that grid so that we can move the 0 over 1 to the right. All right, so let me just remind myself how to do this. Grid template areas. I'm going to look it up online. This one is a little bit complicated sometimes. Mozilla, I usually like it, but W3 Schools is a little bit simpler. Okay, this is actually great. So here, what you can see is they can create a little mini version of the grid. So this grid would have had 3 columns. Sorry, 1, 2, 3 columns, and 1, 2, 3 rows. And then what they can do is they can make objects take up the whole first row, like this. So A takes up the whole first row. B, instead of taking up a single cell in the grid, will take up these 2 cells right here. And then C will take up these 2. And so if we switch, you'll notice that it keeps the same 3x3 layout, but then it moves the objects around within the grid. So this is a super powerful tool that we're only going to use a small feature of. So I'm going to make a mini grid like this, grid template areas, enter, tab. And instead of being 3x3, I'm going to make the grid 3x4, so 3 columns. And I'm just going to do A, B, C, because I don't want to actually have, I don't want to have a button take up the whole first row. I want to have 3 different buttons within the grid. A, B, C, there. D, E, F, there. G, H, I, there. And then for the last one, I think that there's a code that you can use. I think dot will make that space blank. So this space, this little square is unallowed, I think, with dot. Let me see if that works. G, H, I, J, and then dot. If this doesn't work, I know how to do this. All right, let's see. I really was hoping to do this like that. Let's just see if W3 Space Schools has any extra help with this. So, okay, I guess we have to do it a little bit the hard way. So, each of these objects is in the right spot. I'm going to add to the 0 key, the one that I want to move right now, an ID of it to it. We'll probably end up adding an ID to each of these in the next video when we add in the functionality. So what we're going to add with the ID here is, now that the 0 key has a special way of identifying it, we'll say take the thing with the ID, hashtag 0, and style it so that the grid area for this guy is J. And I think this should move 0 from the spot that it's currently at to this J spot in the grid. Perfect. And the reason why we had to do that with 0 only is everything else automatically wants to go into the spot in order. So the first 9 objects go into the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 spots. And then here we want to move 0 from this spot to this spot, J. So we moved it from here to here. I do think there's a way to automatically block off these spots, but I must have forgotten it before the video, and it's already running a little long for me to investigate. So now I think we've got our app interface completely built, and we're ready to worry about the code here for the JavaScript, which I think will be the next video, but you can maybe already imagine using a loop to count down the time, and then some event listeners to click these, changing the inner HTML of these. It's going to be a lot of familiar tools to create this game. All right, guys, I'm looking forward to making the functionality. See you in class tomorrow.